Hi, students. It's time for the persuasive lecture. This is the last major lecture video I'm going to make for you. I know you're very sad to hear that, but it's possibly one of the most important because your persuasive speech has the most points tied to it of any of your assignments. Plus, persuasion is something that is really important for you to understand, not only for this class, but as you go through life in general. So much of what you do is going to be in persuading people. So just reading the chapter and learning how persuasion works and how effective persuasion works, especially, that's very important, not only for us, but moving forward in your career, with your family, in your community, whatever. Unlike previous chapters where I've kind of taken one of the concepts and built upon it, or I pulled apart some things that I think are important for you to know in putting your speeches together or doing good delivery, that sort of thing. I'm going to repeat and make sure you understand certain concepts from the book, from the text, because when it comes to persuasive speeches, the way you organize the information is a little different from how we do other kinds of speeches. With the informative speeches, we were just talking about something. You're informing people about a thing, a person, a community, an activity. And so basically it was just, we're going to be talking about this thing, and this thing related to your speech topic, and then you just told about them. When it comes to persuasion, though, using a strategy is super important. And so I want to make sure you understand the strategy we're going to want you to use for your persuasive speech. So I'm going to go over some things from the text very deliberately. I want to make sure you understand them, and that if you have any questions, then you have plenty of time to contact me about them. So let's pull up our favorite PowerPoint slides. And first thing I want to do is just reiterate what the definition of persuasion is. Persuasion is a symbolic process, and yes, language is involved with symbols, in which communicators try to convince other people to change their attitudes or behaviors regarding an issue through the transmission of a message in an atmosphere of free choice. Every part of that definition is important. We want them to change either their attitudes, their thoughts, or their behaviors. We want them to do something regarding an issue through a message, which we're going to talk about in detail in our speeches, in an atmosphere of free choice. And that is actually very important. We're very fortunate we live in a country where we are not ordered to believe or think certain things. Not everybody in the world is that fortunate. And if you're ordered and required to believe something, then it's not really a choice, is it? It's not really persuasion. You weren't persuaded to do anything. You were just had to do it, and there you go. So let's move forward. A proposition, then, is the central idea statement for a persuasive speech. We always have a central idea statement that guides everything that goes within our speeches. It's a good idea to have a central idea for any kind of argumentation that you do. It's a statement that advances a judgment or opinion. So your central idea, basically, for your persuasive speech is going to be your proposition. It's what you want people to change, either their thoughts or their activities. Through my speech, I think you should, whatever. That's your proposition. So if I ever mention your central idea statement, it's the same thing as if I say, now, here's your proposition. They basically are synonymous in this case. All right, when you're constructing a persuasive speech, and this is where we get into the organization bit, you have to know what type of proposition are you making. Your central idea statement comes from one of these four categories, basically, and how you then strategize and build your speech depends upon that type of proposition. So we have propositions of fact, propositions of definition, propositions of value, and propositions of policy. Now, right now, I'm sure that sounds crazy. People don't go around talking about, well, what's your proposition of fact? but we do define things when it comes to academia. And so this is what we're doing. Basically, let's start with the proposition of fact, because it's the easiest one. Okay, when we're talking about a proposition of fact, we are basically making a claim that something is a fact or the truth. Sound simple? It kind of is. So what I have below these three propositions are basically propositions of fact. And if I were to make a speech about any of them, I'm basically saying that this is a fact or the truth. Now, down deep, is it my opinion? Yes, but I'm claiming that it's a true thing. And that's what I'm trying to persuade you, that it's not just my opinion, it's a fact. So landline phones are obsolete. You have no use for a landline phone. Why do we even have them anymore? And remember, see, I've put in all these parentheses or not. Whether something is or is not, it's still a matter of fact. It's either a fact or it's not a fact. Does that make sense? Still a question of the proposition of fact. So I could just as easily do a speech on the fact that landline phones are not obsolete. You know, I know a lot of doctors and dentist offices still use fax machines and they require landlines. So if I wanted to do a speech that they are obsolete or not obsolete, doesn't matter. I'm basically saying that it's a fact. Landline phones are obsolete. That is a proposition of fact. Violence on TV is bad for children. I'm saying something is the truth. If you ask me, is that your opinion? That's the truth. Now, it's still an opinion, but the claim I'm making is that it's the truth. And like I said, just with the landline phones, if you put the word not in there, it is still a proposition of fact. Violence on TV is not bad for children. And are you saying that's an opinion? I'm saying that's a fact. Violence on TV is not bad for children. Bowling is a sport, or bowling is not a sport. You're basically saying that something is. And that's it. So when we're organizing a speech that is for a proposition of fact, the first thing you do, and this is for everything, you find resources that support your claim, but then you use the topics that you find, and this is much like an informative speech, as your main points. So just as with your informative speech, you found topics that supported your central idea statement, it's the same thing with a proposition of fact. So if I decide that my proposition of fact persuasive speech is going to be that bowling is a sport, I go out, I find resources that support my proposition. And each one of those topics that supports my central idea statement becomes my main point. Bowling requires physical skill. Bowling requires physical exertion. Bowling is competitive. Basically, I look at what a sport is, and each one of those topics then reinforces my proposition of fact. So proposition of facts are fairly easy to understand. That's why we're not doing them. I'm going to make y'all's life a little more tricky, but just know what a proposition of fact statement is. And hey, if you're out and about, if you're watching television and you hear somebody give an opinion that they're claiming is a fact or the truth, tell yourself, hey, that's persuasion and that's a proposition of fact. He's proposing that that is a fact, or if it's not, that's the fact. I think that makes sense. Good. Okay. So proposition of definition is something that you all probably will not have to deal with very much. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to make sure you understand what it is. In fact, proposition of definition is kind of hard even to say, but you're basically claiming that a word or a concept has a certain and specific meaning. And this is usually used mostly in legal, political, academic fields. For example, a lot of times people go to court trying to say legitimately for our country what the meaning of a certain word is, or what a certain concept is, so that laws can be written that reflect how you interact with that concept. For example, Second Amendment is a big example of this. The Second Amendment has the right to bear arms. So people all the time are saying, well, what are we talking about when we say arms? Are we talking about handguns? Are we talking about, rifles, regular guns that people will be having? Or are we talking about huge munitions, missiles, cannons, do the people have a right to have any weapon that exists? Then to bear arms, does this mean, you have to have a special permit to carry an arm, to bear, or does it mean no permits is what this law is required? So basically, anytime we have to define a concept or a word and somebody makes a statement about it, this is our opinion about it that we're stating is this definition. That's a proposition of definition. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, we're not really going to be dealing with them in our class, so don't worry too much about it unless you someday decide upon a legal career, you'll be dealing with propositions of definition quite a bit. All right, so on fourth to the proposition of value. Now, this is one we're going to be really hearing a lot about. With a proposition of value, your claim is that something is of value. And this means it's good or it's bad, it's worthy or unworthy, it's right, it's wrong, it's just, it's unjust, it's moral, it's immoral, it's ethical, it's unethical. So basically, it can be a good value, it can be a negative value. So you're saying that something is good or it's bad, but you're making a value judgment about it. So if, for example, we're at home and I make spaghetti and my husband says this spaghetti is good, he just made a proposition of value. He's making a value judgment about my spaghetti. It's not a super important one, but it's still a proposition of, he's proposing there is value in the spaghetti. If he had sat and said, this spaghetti is bad, that's still a proposition of value, because he is claiming lesser value, basically. Something is not of value, which is still a proposition of value. So anytime you can ascribe a moral judgment or a different kind of value to something, that's a proposition of value. So here we have some examples of what would be propositions of value. Circuses with animal acts are unethical. We're basically making that value judgment that if a circus has an animal act, they are acting unethically. Now, someone could flip this and say circuses with animal acts are not unethical. That's also a value judgment. A vegan diet is the healthiest way to eat. We're basically saying health is a value. We're ascribing healthy or not healthy as being a virtue, that there is value in it. So we're basically a vegan diet is, we're saying it's positive, is the healthiest way to eat. Someone could also do a proposition of value speech. A vegan diet is not the healthiest way to eat. And that would also be a proposition of value. College educations are important for successful futures. The word important is what we're looking there. They're ascribing a certain value to college educations. Someone could also make a speech. College educations are not important for successful futures. Still a proposition of value, whether it's of high value or low value or no value. If it's about how valuable something is, how good it is, how worthy it is, how right, just, moral, ethical, that is a proposition of value. When we're talking about ethics especially, those tend to be propositions of value. And why do I say that? Because your persuasive speech is all about picking an ethical question, answering it, and giving a speech on it. So most likely, in fact, there would be very few cases, I imagine, for your speeches that wouldn't be considered to be propositions of value. In fact, I hope they are, because then this will be the way you will need to organize them. Pay attention. All right, I know I shrunk up the font on here and it looks like there are too many words, and there are, but I want to make sure you really understand this. So when you are giving a speech where the central idea is basically a proposition of value, first you have to define the value. We have to understand where you're coming from. Then you have to present the arguments according to that value. Then you have to be thinking about what people will be thinking in their heads while you're talking about all this stuff, and you have to refute possible arguments. So there are 3 things you need to do. Let's say we go with the vegan diet is the healthiest way to eat. I don't need a vegan diet, but just say, this is what I decide to go with. The first thing I need to do is to define what it means to be healthiest. To have a healthy diet, that's the value. I have to first define it. So you'll look and see my first main point in my body is going to be presenting the definition of my value. And my statement here is going to be healthy eating means getting enough vitamins and minerals, eating a variety of foods, and getting the proper number of calories. I say, if people are doing those 3 things, that is healthy diet, or that's healthy eating. So then I have to show in my next main points how a vegan diet meets that definition, meets those points within the definition. So my main point 2, a vegan diet easily allows people to get enough vitamins and minerals. See, I'm going back to my definition. I'm making my definition work for my argument. Third main point, a vegan diet allows people to eat a variety of foods. See, that's also in my definition. And a vegan diet allows people to eat the proper number of calories, which is the third part of my definition. And then all of my subpoints under my main points would be the details that show how this is possible. Now, remember, all through this, we need to be thinking about what the audience's mindset is while I'm talking. And you do this too. Whenever someone is trying to persuade you in your brain, you are thinking of ways to counter that argument. You're thinking of, but what about, kind of things. Or, that's not what I'm thinking. So you need to be thinking about possible ways that your audience is refuting these ideas in their brains. And your next main point, which is number 5 down below, that's where you refute those arguments. And you also use supporting materials in your sources to back up, this refutation, I think is actually a word, but this refuting. So when we get to this point, I've given all the details about how vegan diets meet the definition that I've set. Now I have to refute the arguments, and I have a point where people may have reservations about eating vegan, but those can be overcome. And all of the information that I put here counters arguments that I think people are thinking of in their brains. For example, if someone comes up to me and says, you really should be eating vegan, the first thing I'm going to think about is, I'm really going to miss a lot of the things that vegans don't eat. I'm also going to be thinking it's more expensive. Probably going to be thinking, if I'm the only one eating vegan, but the rest of my family is eating whatever they feel like, that's going to be difficult too. So knowing those arguments in my main point 5, all the subpoints are going to be talking about how those arguments are easily overcome. You just have to be a big person, make your own food. You will be surprised how much, once you get over the hump of deciding you're not going to eat meat or dairy products, you might discover there's a whole world of foods out there, and you won't miss them, but you need to have evidence proving these kind of things. So let's review this, because honestly, for your persuasive speech assignment, this is going to be how I want you to organize your main points. First point is going to be defining the value, which in this case was healthy. A vegan diet is the healthiest way to eat. Well, how are we defining healthy? That's our first main point. Then 2 through 4 are the 3 ways that we defined healthy eating according to being a vegan. And then the 5th one, we take all of the arguments that we think people could have, or at least some of the biggies. You don't have to think of all of them, but at least think of 2 or 3 really good ones that people are probably thinking about. And you want to find information that counters that. Because if you tell them, you know what, I know what you're already thinking. You're thinking this is going to be tough. It's going to be more expensive. I tell you it's not. That, lets them know, okay, this is extra information. My criticisms or my concerns may not be valid. This is probably something I need to consider. So then you'd go to your conclusion, which has the 3 goals that we all know about. And that's how you organize the main part of your persuasive speech when you're dealing with a proposition of value. If you are totally confused still, reach out to me. If we need to meet on this further, that's fine. But I think it's somewhat straightforward, but it's different from what we're used to. But you can see the logic in it. First thing you have to do is define your term. You have to then back up your assertion through that definition. And then you have to, overcome the arguments. And it has a definite logic in there. All right. The 4th kind of proposition is a proposition of policy. And I used to have my students do their persuasive speeches about this, but I think doing the ethical arguments actually is going to be a lot more interesting for you all and for me. So this is what we're going to do. Anyhow, a proposition of policy is when your claim is something should or should not happen. We want people to think something, or we want people to do something. Previously, we were just trying to get people to agree. For example, with proposition of fact, I'm stating this is a fact. Okay. With the propositions of value, I want people to think, okay, this is valuable or not valuable. With the proposition of policy, you want people to think or to do something, which is an action. Even the thinking is an action. So this is quite often what you most deal with in your day-to-day life. For example, we've got 3 examples of propositions of policy below that could be used for persuasive speeches, not for our class, but in future. Schools should prosecute cyberbullying. I want something to happen, and I want people to think like I do. If you're not part of the school, I want you to think this so that you can support whatever needs to happen. Citizens should vote in every election. That's definitely something I want people to do. States should not legalize the use of marijuana. Remember, a not statement is just as valid as a should statement. And propositions of policy are just like the other ones. Either something's valuable or not valuable. It's still a proposition of value. When it comes to policies can be for things to happen or not to happen. And so in this case, the not still makes it a proposition of policy. In this case, if we're a legislator and we're speaking to them, if we're speaking to legislators, we want them to do something. But if we're giving a speech to just a group of people, we want them to think that something should happen. They will join our thinking and then move forward with perhaps other actions that would benefit this sort of argument. So let's take a look, because this one's got a totally different strategy. And though you're not going to be required to follow this strategy this term, it's really important to know. So more words everywhere. Stick with me. So when we're organizing a speech for a proposition of policy, there's 2 ways we can go about it. If you only need people to think things, then we use kind of a problem solution format, or a problem, here's the problem you have, here's the cause of that problem, and here's the solution. So much like the proposition of value speech, the first thing you have to do is state, for the value, you have to define what the value is. For a proposition of policy, you have to define the problem. Here's a problem we all have. I'm sure you agree with me. And then you either follow up with the solution, which could take a couple of main points, or we start with, here's the problem we all share. That problem is caused, we have to define the cause by this, and you present data showing that that is indeed the cause. Then you present the solution in a different main point. For example, for the argument that states should not legalize the use of marijuana, um, the first thing we need to state is, here's the problem. And then, or these are the problems. Here are the solutions. And there are a couple of ways to organize this. I kind of did this we're going to start with the problems, which each have kind of the solution. Oh, actually, here are the problems. 1, 2, 3. Pardon my organization. You got to be on top of it. The main points 1, 2, and 3 are basically the problems. And then your main point 4, here's the solution. So, problems with states legalizing the use of marijuana. Smoking or ingesting marijuana is unhealthy. We already have a lot of unhealthy people. This would just add to it. The second one, smoking or ingesting marijuana is addictive. It would create a lot of new addicts and also add to that number 1 main point. Number 3, our nation already pays a lot of financial cost for those who smoke or ingest marijuana. Remember the healthy bits I talked about earlier? There's cost in that. So this is a financial cost. And this would make it skyrocket. So then we get to the solution. The only solution is therefore to support state efforts to keep it illegal. Does that make sense? So sometimes your problem can be multiple main points and your solution can be multiple main points. But it does follow this idea that first you have to state what the problem is. Then you have to state what the solution is. A lot of people think just by saying this should happen, that we're all on the same page. And that's not necessarily true at all. So that's why the first thing you have to do is define the problem. Make sense? Okay. So if action is needed, then we have a very specialized thing, and it's called Monroe's motivated sequence. And trust me, I learned about Monroe's motivated sequence when I took public speaking way back when I took my classes in a cave. And it actually is a very logical way of giving a speech. And if you watch a lot of advertising, because ultimately they do want action, they want you to go out and buy something. With public service announcements, they want you to think something, which also kind of uses this. But if someone really wants you to act, do something, purchasing is definitely an action. They're most likely using Monroe's motivated sequence. So if you were to do a persuasive speech, which was a proposition of policy that required an action, this is how you would do it. In your introduction, basically you're calling attention, and the red words here are basically the steps according to Monroe. First thing you need to do is call attention, and that's what you would do in your introduction. You'd call attention to the topic, why it's important to people, and how you're connected to it. Then your first main point would be to define the need. Like all of these other things, the first thing you have to do is define either the value, you have to define the problem, and why it needs to be taken care of. Why should I act? Why should I expend energy to do this? Then the second main point is talking about satisfaction. And that's where you present the solution. We define the problem. Now we're presenting the solution. We're not waiting to the end. We're doing this in the middle. And we describe it in detail. Here's what the solution is. You purchase this item. Or you vote. Or you do whatever people are saying should happen. The third main point then, we've said the solution in the middle. So what are we going to do now? We are going to help the audience visualize. We're going to describe the pros and cons of the future meaningfully with or without the solution. And sometimes people talk about, here's the great future you'll have with the solution, or here's the terrible future you'll have without the solution. Whichever way you go, you want to be super good with the descriptive words, with the metaphors, so that people can really picture how great their life is going to be with the action taking place, or how unfortunate things are going to be without it having taken place. Then the fourth main point is going to be action. We want to be very specific about what we want people to do. So not just the solution, we want you to go buy it. We're going to tell you where to buy it. We're going to tell you how much it costs, maybe. We're going to talk, It used to be with a lot of children's toy and cereal product, commercials, they would say, go tell your mom. Go tell your mom you only want Oreo Bites cereal, in the big box. It's only a cheap price of 99 cents per box, but they would be very specific because they know that kids would go, Mom, we have to have Oreo Bite cereal now. But you want to be very specific, even if it's with adults. If I'm wanting people to vote, basically, I need to tell them where to go. I need to tell them to do the dates. I need to tell them that sort of thing. So then the conclusion, I've been talking so much in this video. Basically, you want to meet the 3 conclusion goals. And I think I went a little further on this graph because I think I have another slide. Yep. That kind of gives the example. I kind of gave some of this away a minute ago, but let's keep plowing forward, shall we? So if my proposition of policy is that citizens should vote in every election, and that's, I want them to take an action. Here is how I would organize that speech according to Monroe's motivated sequence. My introduction would be, remember, getting attention. I would say voting is the very essence of being an American. Citizens should vote in every election. Basically, I would talk about how important voting is. And as a concept for Americans, it's what made us great initially, that every person had the right to have a voice in their government. So bringing attention, this is something important to you. It's important to me. First main point, there's a need for people to vote. The numbers of voters has plummeted over the years. And that means fewer and fewer people are choosing how millions and millions of people are living. And we have to think about who those people are. Are they people that share values that you and I have? We need to have a more representative government. And that means everybody has to vote so that their specific voice is heard. Number 2, satisfaction. People should make it a point of American pride to vote often. Remember, that's where I say what the solution is. We need to make it a point of pride to vote often, not just that it's a duty or not just that it's, something, some places, they don't get to vote. And when they turn out, they're ecstatic, they're excited. This is participation in their government. That's what we need to make it, a point of American pride to vote often. So then we have to visualize, imagine a future where voter turnout is 100% and we hear everyone's voice. Imagine what our US legislature would look like. Imagine what our state legislatures would look like. Imagine what our city and county leadership would look like. Probably they'd be very different because everybody's voice is being heard, but it would be an accurate representation. Then 4, action. So here's what I want you all to do. I want you to get registered. I want you to pay attention to election dates. Make sure that you consider them to be important. You make time to go vote. And then it's important to learn the issues, because if you just show up and then the ballot is in front of you and you don't know what anything means, you're just voting willy-nilly and your voice doesn't really mean that much. But if you know what the issues are and you know what you think about them, your voice can truly be heard. Then at the conclusion of a speech, we do the 3 goals that we do, which are signaling, hey, we've reached the end of our speech. We summarize the information that we had in the main points, and we end with a meaningful note, that clincher statement that we all like so much. So propositions of fact, propositions of definition, which I said, remember, we don't really do too much with those. Propositions of value and propositions of policy. 4 types of persuasive speeches. The one that our persuasive speech is going to be required to work with is, since we're answering an ethical question, we're talking about values, and most likely you will need to follow the structure for propositions of value. So right there, you don't even have to choose which kind of proposition you're going to be going with. We're using a different structure than your other classmates. We're all just going to start with that one. Every now and then, though, I have somebody who takes an ethical question and they turn it into an action. And I'm like, okay, you did the work. But I'm asking you all, stick to the questions that are in the question list for our assignment, and let's stick to the propositions of value. Whew. Well, that was quite a final lecture, wasn't it? If I get enough people asking me, hey, can we go over this process a little bit more? I'll make another video, or I'll sit down with people one-on-one if we need to. But feel free to watch this as many times as you need to so that you understand the processes. Or if you need to go back to the previous video where we talked about what the assignment was, feel free to do that as well. Reach out, as I always encourage you to do, if you have any questions or concerns, problems. This one, remember, your persuasive assignment ends on the day that your final exam would be happening. So there really is no time to postpone or push past if something happens. Try to get the work done early, because something always comes up at the end. You always have other assignments in your classes that suddenly become more important than you thought they might. So getting your work done early in the process, getting your outline reviewed by me when the outline check comes up, that's a great idea. That way, some of your outline is done early. You have plenty of time to practice. And then when the last final 2 weeks of the term are here, you're not just running around like a chicken without a head trying to make things happen. You've been working on making them happen all along. So you're just basically bringing things with you to their logical conclusions. All right, I'm going to repeat this again. Reach out to me if you have any questions, and I will keep in touch. If we need to have one-on-ones, if we need to have phone calls, I'm all for that. Really looking forward to seeing your persuasive speeches. All right, goodbye for now.